workshops or book studies that are important to issues that come up for you and your family. So I am extremely thrilled to introduce Howard Hiton to you. Last year we brought Howard in to talk about competitiveness and high expectations. And if you happen to miss that, we videotape our workshops and they are found on our webpage. And our webpage, if you go to the Kansas School District page and you go to the tab that says Schools and Resources, you click on it, then go to All Student Wellness Program. When you click on that, you'll get bumped to our wellness page, and on our wellness page, it will have things like archived videos of past speakers. It will also have articles and readings and books, and it will also tell you what's coming up. So we try to keep a lot of things coming at you. They might not all hit your mark, but if you know somebody that you think might be interested in the topics that we're providing, please send them. That's our goal. Our goal is to bring us together as a community and really focus our time and attention on issues that are important to you. So if something comes up in your family and you're like, hey, we need a workshop on this, or I'm really interested in this, please email me. My name is Jennifer McMillan. Tell me what you think. So we do have some things coming up. We have a transition to middle school night for parents. How do we emotionally support kids as they transition to middle school? And we also have a transition night to high school. How do we emotionally support kids going to high school? We also have some book studies running. And we're going to engage in a summer book study that we brought Howard in to talk about boys, and you're going to get dipped in boy culture tonight. He's going to really give you some great things to think about. This summer, we're going to do a book study on girls. The book is called Untangled, and it's about the 7 strands of adolescence for girls. So if you're interested in all in that, please look at our website, sign up. So I'm going to turn it over to Howard. Let me tell you a little bit about him. I met Howard probably 10 years ago. Is that when BAM came out? So 10 years ago, I met Howard when I was working in a neighboring district. And Howard has really made much of his career focused on boys and how do we emotionally support boys in unique ways and help them become their best selves. Howard is an excellent speaker. One of the reasons I really like to watch him talk is because he's a real deal, like normal, heartfelt guy. He's not like going to be talking to you, talking down to you. He's in it with us, right? And so Howard also has sons. He has a private practice in Portland. I'm going to put the handouts that we had that now we've run out of on our wellness page. So if you'd like one, please look on there. You can download it. I'm also going to put a link to Howard's website. He also has really fantastic resources on his website as well. So I'm done talking to you. I'm going to turn it over to Howard.
All right, are people comfortable? Did you make the right seat selection? Are you happy with that? Your no back or back chair? Nice to be here. Thank you so much for everybody showing up. It's a good crowd on the first summer-ish kind of night that we've had in months, it feels like. So I appreciate you showing up to think about boys and to participate in a conversation with me about boys. Let me tell you just a little bit about who I am and how I got here, and then we'll jump in and we'll run because there's a lot I want to do with you tonight. So I guess I never started out to be like the boys person, but I have become the boys person in Portland. About 15 years ago, actually, Portland Public Schools approached me and asked me if I would do some research about boys in schools and make recommendations to the school district about how boys were doing in schools. So I spent a year researching what we knew then about boys' development, about boys' performance, and then making recommendations to the school district as a whole. So I in-serviced all the school principals and school counselors, spent lots of times in schools, and then lots of times across the region talking to various people about raising boys. So some of what you hear me talk about tonight comes from what I've learned in the classroom, spending time with with teachers and principals and counselors about how boys are doing academically. We're not going to talk a ton about academics tonight. So we're going to do sort of the base, and maybe eventually we'll get to that another time. Jennifer mentioned my work around boys advocacy and mentoring. So a group that I co-authored with Stephen Grant, who's a school counselor in Portland, and Peter Mortola, who is a professor of counseling psychology in Portland at Lewis and Clark. And the three of us co-authored a book called BAM, and it's all about running strengths-based groups for boys. And how do we approach boys as something other than as a problem, which you'll hear me talk about tonight. And then what are the ways that we could draw boys into rich contact in a boy-friendly kind of way. So a lot of what I've learned has come from working with those guys, and we're going to do a workshop actually on May 11th. Some of you got the handouts for this, but on May 11th we're going to spend a full day at Catlin Gable School talking about all things boys, including topics we can't get to tonight, like boys in education, boys in video games, boys and aggression, and sexuality. And how to in today, which I'm going to try to touch on a little bit tonight also, but how in today do we help boys grow up with a healthy sense of sexuality, and how do we help them to understand what consent is and that sort of thing. So I'm going to get to that a little bit tonight. But I invite you to join us on May 11th. If you can make it, that would be great. You can find more information on my website about that. I've got two sons. We are at graduation year, so I've got a graduating college kid and a graduating high school kid, so who's in the final couple weeks of making a decision about where he's going to go to college. So some of what you heard me talk about tonight comes from IRL, in real life, really doing it, raising boys, and I'm sure you'll hear me talk about things with them. And I'll say this about my boys. My boys are very different. Their styles are very different. And it's easy to kind of run in a short time like this, when I've got an hour and a half with you. It's easy to run and say boys are like this and boys are like that, which is not, which is, if I'm really thoughtful and slower, I won't do that. But I won't always remember that tonight. So I want to let you know that there is a range of boyness. I know that. And a lot of what we're going to talk tonight about is sort of the bell-shaped curve, the middle of the curve, and where the majority of boys fall. I have a private practice working with almost all boys, and right now, like, an overwhelming amount of 11-year-old boys. So, which says something if you're parenting an 11-year-old, that you're not alone. It's a hard time. It is by far the peak age right now for me. Okay, so speaking of that, when you're thinking about the boys in your life, you're thinking about the boys that you're teaching, you're counseling, or you're parenting. Who's thinking about preschool, kindergarten, first graders? Okay, how about later elementary, second, third, fourth, fifth? Okay, so a bunch of little ones. And middle school? And a bunch of you. Okay, and high school? All right. And anybody beyond high school? Oh man, I'm alone. Okay, good. Well then I serve as a beacon of hope for you that, that it will all work out, or usually it does. So, okay, and then when you think about the boys in your lives, and you think about including adult boys in your life, when you think about the boys in your life that are a challenge, or what's difficult about them, what is it that's difficult? What is it that's challenging, that's frustrating, that makes you give up hope sometimes, or makes you feel hopeless? Come on in.
Physical aggression.
Physical aggression.
Anger.
Anger. Lack of empathy.
Big emotions.
Really big emotions. Yeah.
Or expressing emotions.
Or not talking about emotions at all.
Not following through.
Not following through.
Procrastination.
Procrastination.
Video games.
Video games, anybody? Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right, and then when you think about what's wonderful about the boys in your life, when you think about what gives you hope, what resources your boys have that make you feel confident about their future. What are those things? What are the things that, that you're seeing in your classroom or in your parenting? Their persistence. Nice. That's kindness. Humor, creativity. Friendships. Energy. Okay. Adventurousness, willing to try new things. Curiosity. Awesome. That's great. When I go to school classrooms, a lot of times, if I ask this question, I'll get what's challenging, it's their energy. What's great about having them in their classroom, it's sometimes their energy. You know, that they're willing to raise their hand and answer a question before the teacher has asked the question. So there's an eagerness. And the same thing with, with their humor, that their humor can fill up a classroom, but can also be, a problem for the classroom. We'll talk about that a little bit. But the main notion I want to share with you that's going to be something that comes up in our evening tonight is that so often we tell boys what not to do, and we focus on the negative side. We focus on, so don't be so funny, don't be so active, don't be so aggressive, stop thinking about sex, don't play video games. Don't be so competitive. So a lot of what we do with boys is about what not to do. And we need to do some, there are places for that, right? It's all about in moderation. And how do you maybe do these things that seem to be natural to a lot of boys, but do them more skillfully and understand where the limits are. And we don't do a very good job of holding up for boys what it means like to use aggression in a healthy way, for example. Or how do you learn how to use your humor, which has so much social value for boys, in a way that's skillful without really upsetting the teacher. But that's really, we'll talk about that too. That's a good one. Okay, so the plan tonight is, and Megan, we're okay up there? Everything you need is working? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about some data about how boys are doing in their schools and communities. We'll talk about how boys develop and what makes a boy in general. We'll talk about biological, social, and cultural influences. And then we'll talk about strategies a little bit with boys, but primarily the strategy is going to be about, based on all of this, how do we put ourselves in the best position to offer guidance to them? And then we might talk about more specifics, guidance about what. But we'll start with some of the data. And okay, the first one is looking at a national study, and it's placing kids in categories about their attachment to school and how much they identify with being a student. Okay, so over here would be I'm really into school. In fact, I strive to do my best. I really like that I get mostly A's. Okay, that's the really connected to school. Over here would be the kids that are like, over here would be, I go to school because of PE, and I have friends. And then over here would be like this. School's not for me. And of the kids in this category, not surprisingly, 70% of those that this group would call the alienated. They're alienated from school, disconnected, detached. Of the kids in the alienated category, 70% were boys, which is not that surprising. And so this thing about also alienation, disconnection, turning away is something that will come up again today too, because it's a theme that runs through a lot of the places that boys tend to struggle. Males account for 80% of youth suicides, although girls try more often, boys use more lethal means, so they're more effective at it, which is a concern. Schools are changing, so that, the demands, you see this with your kids now, so the demands of what kids are asked to do is extraordinarily different from what you were asked to do. And even in the time since I've been a parent, the expectation that kindergarten be more of an academic life, and that you're learning to read and write, sit still, doesn't work so well for boys. It doesn't work so well for children, I don't think, really, but especially affects boys. So limiting recess, limiting movement time is a challenge for a lot of little boys. Okay, I'm from Portland, so I used to actually get the Oregonian, but and in the Oregonian, at the end of the school year, they do this like there's a special pull-out section of all of like the valedictorians of the metro area. You know what I'm talking about? It's like the pictures of all the kids that are at the top. And okay, so then last time I looked at it, so it's been a few years, but last time I looked at it, of the kids that are the top of the top at their schools, 71% were females, 29% were males. Attention deficit disorder is much more commonly diagnosed in boys than girls, which is not a surprise, I'm sure. But what's your guess? Kids in America on medication for attention deficit that are boys, the percentage. What's your guess at that? 90%. So 90% of kids in America on medication for attention deficit are boys. And America consumes 90% of the world's Ritalin. So somewhere in there, there's a math problem to be done, which I don't exactly know how to do it, but that's not really right. I mean, that's a problem about how we approach boys and how we approach girls, because attention deficit exists within girls too. And we tend to, like a girl might be neurobiologically inattentive and struggle with the same sorts of features that other kids do. But if in class her behavior is more like this, like that, she doesn't get our attention. And for boys, they really might not have issues with attention, but their behavior is so squiggly that we overdiagnose it with boys and we miss it with girls. So, and not to say that it's not a real thing, because it's a real thing, and I will refer kids for evaluation, and I have some kids that medication has changed their lives. So that's really important to say that too. But we also tend to overdo it with boys. The issue in schools is about literacy. And so girls enter kindergarten with more words than boys, more advanced reading. We teach them the same way. And boys never make up. They never make that up. So they're always lagging behind. In reading and writing, I used to be able to go to schools and get data by gender for how school was doing in benchmarks, how they're doing with their math benchmarks in Oregon State, in the state of Oregon, and how they're doing with reading, and I would always see gaps. There is now the gap that's represented by boys being behind girls in reading is 3 times greater across the country than that's represented by girls being behind boys in math. And if you've been paying attention, we've totally changed how we teach math in the last 20 years. So math now involves a lot more language. And we've totally been thoughtful about noticing how girls are falling behind in science and math and changed how we deliver it. And it's paying off. Girls are doing better, which is great. And leads me to think that we can do the same with boys and literacy. Which, again, tonight we're not going to really touch on, but we will spend time with that in May. This is looking at college enrollment. So we've been in the throes of looking at colleges for my 18-year-old, and when my 22-year-old was in the 4 years ago, it was the same thing. The schools we're looking at are 60% young women and 40% young men. That's how colleges are, typically. And so where it used to be the exact opposite. So in 1970, it was the opposite. And then it's really a pretty dramatic visual, isn't it? And part of the thing that's unfortunate about this slide is, that there's only 100% available. So improvement for girls gets reflected as a loss for boys, which is not the way that I want to frame the conversation. Relative to the total population of young women, there are more young women going to college. relative to the total population of young men, there are fewer men going to college. And that's what's more important, not about girls versus boys. But, and similarly, though, it is because we've thought about this for girls, and how do we get more girls in college campuses. This is Portland schools. I'll speak to the special education and the referrals. In Portland and across the country, 3/4 of the kids are getting discipline referrals are boys. In Camas, I'm sure it is. I didn't look at your data, but I'm sure it is. It's consistent. So 3/4 of the kids that are getting discipline referrals are boys. Two-thirds of the kids in special education are boys. And here's the last slide that's like about numbers, and it's a biggie, but it's an important thing to kind of frame the some of the philosophy for the rest of the conversation. Okay, this is the social skills rating system, which a school psychologist might use to make a determination whether a child merits special education services. And it's similar to the BASC, which maybe some of you are familiar with. And it is following kids from kindergarten through 10th. And it's broken up into two sides. So it's the pro-social skills like cooperation, assertion, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. And it's problem behaviors like externalizing, internalizing, or hyperactivity. And then TPS means a teacher's evaluation of that student, a parent's evaluation of that student, and the student's evaluation of themselves. Okay? If there's an F somewhere, it means it's statistically significant in favor of females. If there's an M somewhere, it's statistically significant in favor of males. If there's a dash, there's no difference. Okay? So on the social skills side, everywhere where there's statistically significance, where it is statistically significant, except for these two spots, is female. On the problem behavior side, everywhere it's statistically significant, except for this one spot, it's male. Okay, so what does that make you, what questions does that make you want to ask, or what does it make you think about? What do you notice? What do you wonder?
Everything is perception.
Nature versus nurture, and everything is perception.
Because it's the teacher's perception, the parent's perception, and the student's perception, and I think people possibly, I'm not accusing people of anything, but may give girls more grace, maybe.
Right, okay. So maybe girls are given more grace.
When most of your teaching staff is female, they're going to view male behavior in a different way.
Maybe, can people hear? Because I'm just repeating it. Okay, so I'll keep repeating then. So maybe then, if most of the teaching staff is female, then there's some bias.
Well, I think the performance in school, behavior-wise and academically-wise, was always this way. Even when I was growing up and my mom was growing up, all girls were always better at school in behavior and academically. They were always had better grades and everything. Yeah, things were changing toward the college, and some say it's because boys mature later.
Right.
Then they get their purpose later
Right.
in life. And on top of it, it's just the way the business is that men have more opportunities.
Eventually, right.
Choosing to grow a family versus going into corporate world. So
Right.
I think these statistics, as scary as they sound, are pretty much always there.
Right, okay.
I think it could be that the system, though, is geared towards female behavior as opposed to male. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people in this room have 3 boys, and they are bouncers, and I mean, even if they're not balancing their bodies, they're bouncing balls, and
Yeah.
in like a Montessori or maybe an open classroom environment, there's a lot more opportunity for them to move, to fidget, to
Yeah.
get that nervous energy out. But when you consider what a social skill is, a lot of them self-control, empathy. I mean, a lot of them require you to sit still
Yeah.
for a long period of time, and boys are not hardwired for that.
Right.
So I think the way we teach is actually not conducive to male behavior.
Okay. So let me help us take it to the next level about thinking about, we're talking about bias a little bit, and like either teacher bias or the systems bias, or, and I want to think about the test. The test that's used to evaluate. What do you think?
My comment was going to be, I think the questions being asked might be the problem.
Right. And I would say, you know, if we were just to have a conversation and we were hanging out having a glass of wine or whatever, and I said, what do you think are social skills? We probably would all say these. Like, these are the ones we're pulling for, but they might be the ones that that serve girls better than boys, and we might be missing some social skills that really help boys function, but we haven't yet figured out how to even know what those are, let alone have them on a test that's standardized. Like leadership. Like what else? What might be an invisible social skill for a boy? Humor. Right, so skillfully using humor. Knowing how to get payoff from your friends but not really annoy an adult is really like, is a golden social skill. Like if
Not harboring.
letting things go is a social skill for boys. Like the boys at recess that are most about following rules and enforcing rules and can't let it go struggle. And so a boy that can roll with it at recess is going to function much better.
So this reminded me of an issue that we just had in our family last week. My son's in 4th grade, and the recess lady banned all boys from this certain game, but is allowing all the girls to still keep playing.
Yeah.
And like he was talking about it, and it was really hurtful to him that this recess lady is totally just like, if you're a boy you can't play, if you're a girl you can't keep playing.
Yeah.
And it's for the rest of the year.
Well, I'm sorry for that. What would be a better way? What would you hope? What would you hope that how that could be handled?
Work with all the kids, set up a system of rules, talk to them about what the problem is. Let's all work together so
Teach.
that everybody can enjoy the game.
Teach. Teach, coach, mentor, have adults there to guide.
To her credit, we haven't spoken to her, and it might be a resource issue where she just can't handle
For sure.
the whole system,
Yeah.
boys and girls.
This
Yeah.
was a 4th grade perspective.
Fair enough. Yeah, and I'm not going to, but you know, the story's not that uncommon. Like, what I thought you were going to say was they banned balls at recess, because I've heard schools that do that, which is really sort of, or running. Like, you can't run at recess. And we could rant, and I don't want to rant, but how do you problem solve it? That's would be the thing that's more effective, because if you take that away from a boy, you might be taking away the best part of their day. And if the rest of their day is struggling to have good penmanship or sit in their chair, then we're not doing well by them. You know, we're not serving them at school. So I want to I want to summarize this with can we think about what might be the social skills that like leadership, like the skillful use of humor, like using your aggression. Like aggression is essential for a soccer player or a basketball player, right? It could even be reframed to be, well, and it's essential for certain careers. And it could even be reframed to be essential like for going after your high school essay. Like, can you grapple with something in the way that you grapple with the ball? So can we begin to reframe and understand what might be these, like what might be invisible social skills for boys? And the flip side is, yeah, girls are great with language. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. Girls are great with language. Girls are great with empathy. Girls are great with connection. Girls are great with words. But they don't always use that for like the upliftment of girlhood. So because I know what you posted on Instagram and I know what's important to you, I can use my really good language skills and my social world skills to really inflict pain on you. So some of these things that we consider at face value to be social skills for girls, like, aren't really pro-social. And so can we learn to be more sophisticated in how we look at all these, you know, how we look at boys and girls and what we consider a social skill?
How does this tie off with the suicide rate, though, the statistics you showed earlier? The last few years in the diagram there, in the chart, show the problem area at the very right bottom as being equal.
Yeah.
And those are the years where kids get in suicide,
Yeah.
drugs, and
Right.
trouble. So it looks like that is a childish maturity thing, but when they start maturing,
Yeah. It is in that one hyperactivity and internalizing thing, yeah. But and I think we'd have to be careful to extrapolate from this some things that are more general to, like, or even to a different topic, like, you know, kids and suicide. But this is a snapshot in time, and I don't exactly know how to answer that question about, like, how does that apply to this?
ADHD is more older usually in kids, not the middle school, maybe a little bit later than that, right?
No, kids get it. Kids get the diagnosis of attention deficit in late elementary, middle school, even younger. But mostly it's in middle school. Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk about development a little bit. And you said, is it nature or is it nurture? And the way that I think about it and the way that we know about it, I think when I first, so 22 years ago, when Sawyer was first born, it was more of a question, which makes me feel old. But it's not that much of a question anymore, that we know that it's both. It is both. And so the story was, and I'm sure a lot of you have tried, thought about this, but the story was, you'd give your, we were trying to raise Sawyer really, like, without any bias, which you can't really do, but still, he had skirts in his dress up. You guys have heard me tell stories about this, but he had skirts in his dress up thing, and he had cars also, and he actually played with the skirts for a while, then he played with the cars a lot more. But the story is sort of like, if you try to do that with kids, there's still this sort of, there's a tendency usually in the middle of the bell-shaped curve, which is important to say, because there is a range. But in the middle of the bell-shaped curve, typically if you give a girl a car to play with, if she does, she might drive it around, but it's still going to be a relational story. She's going to make a story up about going to pick up people or going to do what mom does, typically go to the grocery store or, take care of somebody. And boys, then there's the joke about we don't allow guns in the house, but you serve them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and, like, the sandwich ends up becoming the gun, right? So it is, there do seem to be some propensities for how kids come into the world. And then for sure, culturally, we raise them differently. We treat boys and girls differently. And then culturally, what it means in one neighborhood, race, religion, region is not always necessarily what it means to be a boy in another neighborhood, race, region, religion. So that's kind of how I'm going to talk about it. That's kind of what this says. But my colleague Peter really has introduced me to this idea of thinking about this tendency of attention. And a lot of it has to do with what is interesting to a boy's mind or a girl's mind on the whole when they're little, and where they tend to put their attention. And how that then has ripple effects on who they become. So boys tend to put their attention on things, objects, cars, machines, mobiles. So newborn babies are more interested in looking at mobiles than at human faces. And infant boys prefer car films over face films. Where little girls are more interested in eye contact and facial expressions. And in fact, 2-year-old toddlers who had lower fetal testosterone have higher levels of eye contact and a larger vocabulary. So less testosterone, more words, more eye contact. more testosterone, less eye contact, fewer words. It fits with how you experience, with what your experience is, right? And then among the actions of, the flip side is among the actions of estrogen on language, the areas most sensitive to hormonal effects, like so where a woman is in her cycle, is about language. So verbal fluency, naming, and the speed of producing speech. So testosterone seems to slow down language and eye contact. Estrogen seems to increase language and words. Girls throughout, and women throughout all ages of development are better able to see a face and predict the emotion behind the face. Which is really important. Okay, I'll test you on this, and then I'll tell you why it's important. So the top one: dominant, friendly, horrified, or guilty. Mostly friendly, I heard. Doubtful, affectionate, aghast, or playful? Awesome. So mostly doubtful or possibly playful, and with consideration for aghast, just because whoever feels aghast, I don't know. Or, okay, this person might. And then the last one: contented, apologetic, curious, or defiant. Okay, certainty, finally. Okay, so which is pretty interesting. So all you're getting is eyes, and we have kind of we can make a guess at how that person feels, which is really fascinating. And in fact, yeah, we probably had some reaction internally about that. Okay, but here's the answers. Ooh, I'm off. But top one's friendly, second one's doubtful, and the last one's defiant. It's interesting, this is interesting, because that second one, it's usually a question between is it doubtful or is it playful? And why might that be interesting? Well, there's a big difference, okay? So imagine it's a teenage boy and a teenage girl, not quite exactly sure, is that doubtful or is that playful? And imagine, okay, so that's pretty important. That speaks to this, notion that we'll get to hopefully at the end about consent. But if you're a boy and you're not very good at quickly reading a facial expression and knowing what that means, you end up with 3/4 of the discipline referrals in your school. You end up not knowing, okay, that means my teacher's done. Like that means, and then to know to stop right then. And I'll ask that to kids, the kids that are the goofy kids, how do you know when your teacher's done? Because you want to know where that is. And if you miss it a whole bunch of times, you end up in the principal's office. And it speaks to, how oftentimes, I don't know, when a man tends to give a message, it tends to be less equivocal. Right? It's like its body posture, its language, its size. We're done. This kid in my office yesterday I met for the first time, and he's one of my 11-year-olds, and this is my first meeting with him, and all he wanted to do was talk about how important it is that I help him get a cell phone, which is not a totally uncommon request. It's really annoying, but he wouldn't stop, and I just told him, you have to stop talking about that. I really did. I just said, you have to stop talking about that. We have to talk about something else. And I was unequivocal. I was like, well, I hear you, and now we have to talk about something else. And so my body posture, my language, probably my hand, probably told him that we were done. And so a lot of times when men communicate, it's more like that. And sometimes when women communicate, it's not quite so clear. And so sometimes, like, to really draw a line in the sand for a boy, like, consider that he might not totally be getting your, he might not really be reading your message, he might not really be hearing your message, and so give a little extra, like, clarity about where the line is and where the end of the behavior is. Okay. All right, so this is a really important idea, and it is how we misread boys so often. So a 6-year-old boy is placed in a room by themselves, and a 6-year-old girl is placed in a room by herself. And they're played the tape of a baby that's in distress. And this is from the British Medical Journal. And so they're listening to an audio of a baby that's crying, and then they're observed. And what we see with the girls is, oh, you poor thing, what's wrong? You can observe the girls. They're just listening to a tape, but they're having a reaction to this tape. And they're trying to soothe the baby, even though they can't see it. And what we tend to see with the boys is like that. Okay, that's what you see on the outside. What you see on the inside is, so when you go to measure sweat response and heart rate, internally, who's more agitated, the boys or the girls? I think it says it up there, so that's pretty easy. Okay, internally, the boys are like, you know, like that. Outwardly. Internally, the girls, externally, the girls look like they're really agitated, but they're using language and they're taking action and they're expressing feelings, are regulating them. Boys, because they don't do as well with language and because we haven't trained them as much, don't do as well with that. So it's really important that a lot of times we miss, you know, I think a lot of times working with boys is about translating, because what you see on the outside is not necessarily what's happening for them on the inside. And even their distractibility and their lack of focus and their hyperactivity and their movement in a classroom sometimes is about other things than necessarily attention deficit. So a lot of times behavior gets translated and they might express their anxiety in a different way. They're not going to come out necessarily and say, I mean, even with depression, they don't cry and say, I'm sad, and I feel always, not as much. They might be pissed off a lot, you know, and irritated, and everything gets under my skin, and I'm going to run away from home, and that sort of thing. So a lot of times, because they don't have the skills as much, what they show you on the outside is not necessarily representative of what's on the inside. And what happens, it's a bummer, that if we get a boy that looks like, I'm good, like, I'm good. And they might even say that outside, but inside they're not good, but we think that they're good because they say they're good, and eventually they are a man that, you know, will have the power in corporations, and so we're like, oh, they're probably good, and then we don't get them. So sometimes it's really important to think about, like, what might be behind it doesn't seem like you're all good. And sometimes made me think about, like, excessive use of video games, which is when boys go to when it becomes a method of coping, it's covering something else up. So gaming is important, and it's really important for connection. And it's important to have downtime and hand-eye coordination. There's all kinds of things. And for some boys, it's like a huge area of esteem for them. It's like the one place in their life where they can, like, be the master, be top. I had this boy in my office the other day that told me it was a way that he worked out bullying situations at school. So it was a way that he could stand up for himself. Okay, and sometimes it gets used as a way of coping and avoiding. And so sometimes, like, excessively playing to avoid doing things or avoiding connections is an indication that inside something more is going on. Okay? Okay, so boys, that says empathy allows us to. It's not really quite visible there. But boys tend to be systematizers and girls tend to be empathizers. I'll get to you in a second. But so systematizers are, they're interested in how things fit, how things move, how computers work, how football plays work, solving problems in technology. The example I use a lot of times when my kids were little, well, this was me, when I was little, when I was really little, I had Hot Wheels cars, and I loved Hot Wheels cars. And I was like, I was not like a boy's boy, but I loved cars, and I loved my Hot Wheels tracks. And it was the orange kind of tracks before batteries, I have to say. So it was about gravity. So, you know, you'd connect your Hot Wheels track to the highest place you could in the house with the clamp. Yeah. And the clamp kind of held the first track, and then you'd use gravity to drop which is kind of a boy thing because it's movement, it's kinetic, and so you drop it, and then you do the loop-de-loop, and then you jump, or whatever it is you would do, right? And I could drop, so that's a system. I created a system, I didn't know this, but I was creating a system with my Hot Wheels tracks, and I could drop a car down 100 times, and it would end up in the same place 100 times. It would always do the same thing, and that would be fun for 30 or 40 times. And then I was like, ooh, I want to change the Hot Wheel track and predict what I think is going to be the output. I'm going to change the input to change the output and make a prediction about it. Like I think if I make the thing go higher, if I can find a higher place to clamp it, I think I could jump farther. Or if I take out the loop-de-loop, I'm not going to waste energy and I could jump farther. And then I would do it and I would test it, and then I would test. Then I would track like my ambulance versus my Corvette versus the pickup truck, which was like, again, like I was not that much of, that was sort of, it was just what was interesting to my mind to do that. And I could do that for a long time, and then my kids would sort of do the same thing. And we learned with my kids, though, that if you then could make the car crash into like a stainless steel bowl and make a lot of noise, that was even, like a bigger bonus. So, okay, so that's a system. So it's a system, and it's manipulating a system, and it's predicting the output. A lot of this idea about systematizing and empathizing comes from an author, Simon Baron-Cohen, who's an Oxford professor, and he specializes in autism. And his hypothesis is that we will learn a lot about autism, which is all systems. It's all math, it's all logic, it's all logic at the expense of empathy. So it's not connecting, it's not face, it's not like empathy. And so his hypothesis is we're going to learn a lot about autism from understanding the differences between men and women, or male-female brains. And I'm not sure where that's going to go, but the notion of boys being systematizers is really helpful because it can help you, some of the things that your boys are interested in, like do nothing for you, right? So, my Sawyer, when he was little, he really got into NFL football. And it not only my wife had no place to like file that, it like offended her. She was like, this is everything that's bad. Which was not a very good way to connect with her son. So then, but she did this thing where she's like, okay, this is his thing, and so she like memorized all the NFL teams by division. And then she came home and she told him what she was learning, and he was like, he was like so gleeful that she met him where he was. And this is a thing like to understand, so that's a big important lesson, is like even if sometimes you can understand that part of what the drive is, like Nerf guns or shooting baskets, part of what the drive is it pleases that systematizing brain. So like it's interesting to a boy to shoot a basket. In my office I have a basket, we shoot hoops all the time, and so it's interesting to a boy to shoot up and miss up right and try to make the adjustment to go down left. Like, and throwing rock at a rock, like that, like by the creek somewhere, like you could do that for a long, long time. And so that's interesting to a boy's mind. So the beginning of this understanding, like how do we connect with boys, is understanding what might be that like drives them and what might be that, why is that even interesting to them, as opposed to, I want nothing to do with that, or that doesn't speak to me at all. And if you start to search for where in this obsession is there a system, you will likely find some clue, like, oh, it's that thing. Okay, where girls tend to be more driven by empathy. It's that whole thing, like they will look at faces. They're interested, they're better at point of view. They can look at faces and predict the emotion. They're better with language. Their relationships, especially in middle school, and their connection to their friends is paramount. That's the most important thing. So we know what, so empathy ultimately is about. Empathy is not this. That kid at the beginning when I was like the alienated group, remember that feels like a long time ago, but I was doing this. He's approaching you and he's approaching school like this. This kid is not in connection. This is not contact. And so sometimes what happens is boys disconnect from school, boys disconnect from their family or community. Boys sometimes, like, ultimately, disconnect from their own emotional world and not have a sense like, oh, I have a feeling. Oh, I have a feeling. Oh, I feel lonely, or I feel left out. Oh, how do I meet that need? And so they're this in all facets of their life, which is really about what drives the work that we do with BAM, because it really is about drawing boys into contact in ways that are boy-friendly, that work for them. That's not about like, how do you feel? But that's about like doing activities and games and storytelling that draws them in. So, but it's also, so boys don't do as well with language. They don't do as well on naturally with empathy. They can learn it, and they do. And a lot of the men in this room have learned it. It's not what you were doing when you were in 7th grade, but you've gotten better as you've gotten older. And but you look at like how language arts is taught, for example, and reading and writing and interpreting is so much about point of view. Like the question about like, what do you think the author was trying to say when he or when she? And a boy might be like, I don't know. I can't even really venture a guess. So that's a problem, because that really requires you get outside of your own shoes and you look at the world from a different point of view. And again, like, boys aren't as good as that. So there's a lot of ways that literacy challenges them at school. Okay. All right, and then, okay, I got more to do. I had forgotten where I was. So that's my high school graduate. So he was really cute when he was little. And the notion here is that, so he was really cute and sweet as a little kid, and really expressive, oh my gosh, and like really like a super tender heart. And it was inspiring, actually, like how tender his heart was. And then life kept happening to him, and he's sort of not like that anymore. And he's a lot more like, keep stuff in, struggles with anxiety, like really struggles with feeling. He somatically experiences symptoms. Like in his body, he feels them because he's not as good as expressing them, and expressing them has become really hard for him. And that's partly because it's just what happens sometimes when kids get older. It's partly because his life threw him a bunch of curveballs. And so particularly difficult stuff he had to live through. But the notion is that just through socialization, boys lose their connection sometimes. So I'm going to do this. There are social forces at play that tend to exacerbate what boys already struggle with biologically. So this is the nurture part of nature, of the nature-nurture question. And so if you think about the messages boys receive from popular culture about what it means to be a man, so what they get from video games, from music, from Netflix, from athletics, from media ads. According to those sources, a man is supposed to be what? Tough, strong, not need anybody, show no emotion, do it themselves, powerful.
Discussing feelings is a sign of weakness.
Yeah, if you show feelings, it's weakness. Don't compromise. I think this thing over here, like be indifferent to school, is a pretty popular. Take risks. Be a joker. Like not try, really. Okay, so those I would say are messages that popular culture sends boys about what it means to be a man. Okay, and then if I were drawing those things, be athletic for sure. Be buff. Be competitive. Be a heterosexual. Get the girl. Be interested in sex. All those things. Those are the things. Okay, so that would be the box, like act like a man box, right? And then if you're a boy and you're in middle school and you're not like that, you like to hang out with the girls, you're really bad at sports, you really prefer to read quietly by yourself at recess, what are the names you might get called? Sissy? Wuss? Gay? Weak? Nerd? Mama's boy? Pussy? Fag? All those variations on that. And then knowing what we know about boys, when they get hit with strong emotions, what are they going to tend to do? Get physical? Clam up. Okay, good. So one of the two things. So either they're going to shut down, or they're going to act out. So there's this sort of, so then they do the very things that are in the middle of the box. They don't show feelings, or they fight. And so, so there's this sort of social pressure to stay in the box. If you were never a boy, you don't know this. You might not have ever experienced this. If you were a boy, you know this. I'll tell you, everybody that like middle school this is where it happens. In high school, it gets a little bit more broader, and then in adult world, hopefully, most men grow beyond that. I can only be in here. The thing inside the box, like being athletic, being competitive, being funny, those things aren't bad inherently. But if it's all you can be, and you can't also like to read books or take care of other people, or be a good brother, or be a good dad, like that, those aren't in the stereotypical, this is what a man should be thing, then we're truncating boys in some ways. And that whole system of socializing boys is based on shame. So boys so much don't want to be called out as a girl, as a fag, that they'll take risks. Okay, I'll jump off that roof. Don't call or I'll smoke that weed, or I'll shoplift, or I'll stop doing so well in school. Those kinds of things, because I don't want to be seen as not in the box. So some of that, what we can do for boys is help them understand this, because boys are like, I think of them as like a pinball game. They're like the ball on the pinball machine. They're like just getting bounced around by this whole thing, but they don't have any understanding of it. So some of what we could do for boys is help them to make sense of this. Like I'll do this boy in the box activity. I did it with both of my kids, but I do it with kids all the time in my office. Help them to make sense of things. Because if they can get a little bit of distance, and then they can realize, like, really it's about how do you have friends, and how do your parents support you to be your best you, not just the athletic, whatever, in the box you. Okay? So there's these biological propensities to limit boys' expression and words, and that contribute to competitiveness and aggression. And then there's these socializing forces that further that. Okay? So then it creates a challenge for us, because we got to be able to connect with them, because we can't give them guidance unless we've got a relationship. And so all that we know about what keeps kids resilient starts with attachment, connection, relationship. A child's perception that an adult cares about them, a child's perception that their school community cares about them, are the most protective factors they have. Research after research after research, it's about relationship. Kids cannot learn, they cannot thrive unless there's relationship. But boys can be tricky when it comes to that. So, like this Zitz comic. So there's, it's that same look of that kid that's like distressed. And then the words are not words that you would necessarily know. Or wouldn't, they're not the typical feeling words. So the question is how do you connect with boys knowing this? Well, I'm just going to ask you. I think I'm going to do it this way, okay? So when you think about your boys and you think about okay, this is working, like we're having a talk, and I'm a good mom, or I'm a good dad, and oh, this is excellent. And when it's like that, what's the circumstance? Food. Good. Awesome. Absolutely. Do not underestimate food.
Doing the same thing together. Common ground.
Sharing an activity, having common ground.
Not looking at each other in the eyes.
Not necessarily going full on eye contact. In the car is, I know. Yeah.
Say 3 adjectives after they come from school to describe their feelings in school. And then they start thinking, and just normal is not an answer.
I know.
When they come up with the adjectives, it kind of brings the memories, and then they start talking, oh, something was funny today. And then we get into the conversation.
Oh, that's good. You prompt them with the adjectives? Is that what you do?
No, they have to say
Oh, they have to give 3. Oh, that's really nice.
throughout the day.
Yeah. So you have to give 3 adjectives about your day. You don't ask the question, how was your day? Like, for sure don't ask that. But in fact, you could say, give me 3 adjectives about your day. The same kid yesterday that I had to say, stop talking about cell phones. And I've been working like this for a long, long time, but it was all I just got, yes, no, I don't know, yes, no, I don't know, the whole time. Ouch. Okay, so adjectives, that's a good idea. What else makes it work? Bedtime. Bribery. Paying me to talk to you. I did have this once when my younger son, so the kid I talked to you about that was the sweet little boy that really then like became an internalizer, and I knew this did not work. But I said, and I knew stuff, like I know things are on his mind. He thinks about a lot of stuff he just does not talk about so much. And at one time I was like, you have to tell me. And he said, I do not. And I said, oh yeah, no you don't. Yeah, don't do that. So, what else?
Being interested in what they're interested in. Like
Yeah.
Time to talk about those things, because then the other questions are easier.
Yeah.
Freaking out when they say things.
Start with their interest, go into their world, show me how does this thing, right.
Just being trustworthy.
Right.
When he tells you
Yeah.
this thing happened at school. Talk about how, oh my gosh, why'd you do that?
Yeah.
Taking them for the walk helps too, because there are no electronics, no books, no distractions.
Right.
So you start with what they
Right.
want, and then you go to wherever
Yeah.
you want to go.
So going for a walk with them, you're like you're not looking right at them, so you're kind of like this. Guys, a lot of times are talking to each other like this. So if you think back to that boy that got overwhelmed with strong emotions, he gets overwhelmed with strong emotions, he's shut down, or he gets aggressive. And so we really want to make things be less direct. Like I have a lot of toys in my office, and I have chairs that spin. And a lot of it's because I don't want them to feel like it's such it's like a non-organic environment anyway to go. It's just like not real, like to go to a counselor's office and like talk about stuff. So I try to make it be as relaxed as it can be, and then So sometimes they might be like standing and looking out the window. I've got this great view, and so they're looking out the window and they're watching the cars and stuff like that. And then a mom might be like, now sit down and talk to Mr. Hiton. And I was like, you know, don't, like, being polite is important, and greeting me is really a good thing. And the kids that come in and they can greet me, that's a nice skill to develop. But if I'm asking him to talk about something that might be personal, or he feels awkward to begin with to be there, I don't want him to feel more awkward to have to sit down and be still and talk to me. So finding ways to let them dissipate their anxious energy. Anything, I think a lot of the times when you can come at things indirectly, I'll tell you also so on my website, it's nice that you're all taking pictures though. But on my website, this is, there are more handouts available up there, so do look at it. But yeah, this is worth having. Telling your own stories is that's the crux of the BAM work. Is every group starts with the adult facilitator telling a story. I have told many kids how bad I was at Little League baseball, and how, you know, I was slow and unathletic, and I got picked last for the soccer team and all that sort of thing. And so. And I don't ask them, like, what's it like to be picked last for the soccer team, but I'll tell them all that it was like for me, and then they'll be like, yeah, I know, like, it's blah, 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 blah. And so the more you can use your own stories to draw them in, it really helps, and the more you can be indirect about feelings, like, you know, share the same media. When you're, especially in middle school, when your kids start reading, you know, young adult literature, read what they're reading, because that's all real life. That's the stuff there that they're getting assigned. And if you read with them, it's been a little while for me. I'm not going to get the titles really fast, but if you read what they're reading, that's a great entree into having conversations.
What does it mean to talk about feelings indirectly?
Okay, so you might say, like, I don't say how does that. I could be indirect in any number of ways. How does that feel is very direct. What's that like is a little bit less direct. How are 5th grade boys in your classroom dealing with that is even less direct. So those kinds of things. Or like your idea of that you got to give me 3 adjectives. Like I might say, because then they'll be like, I don't know. And then I'll say, well, if I was in your situation, I might feel this, this, or this. So I might give them multiple choice. So those are all ways to be less direct. I think that makes anything else up there that isn't clear?
What are places that are shame-free?
Not in front of their sister. So this would be an example. So like this one time that this is another, so like, and sometimes it means just with only one parent. Because I had this situation in my kids, so this was not a shame-free situation, so this is another mistake I made, but my son, I can't remember what, this is my older one, he got up to something in 7th grade. It's a hard year. And this hardly ever happened, but for whatever reason, my wife and I were both talking to him in the kitchen. And he was kind of cornered. And that, I don't know why we did it like that, because it's really like, never how we really approached him, but that was full of like, oh, I'm in trouble, you know, and so I'm not going to have a good conversation with him under that circumstance. So, yeah.
Can you give an example of physical contact?
Yeah, so the thing about physical contact was, so at bedtime sometimes, you said bedtime. So at bedtime, like a boy might be like, you know, that they're like electricity is running through their body, like for like most of the day. And then they go to bed and you might give them a back rub or a foot rub or something like that. Or a hair massager thing, right? And then that's the time that their body finally softens and the lights are off. So you're not really, it's like a little bit more, it's less direct. You might be really tired, you're not really ready to talk anymore, but that might be the time that they want to talk. So that's why, like, whatever it is, like, ultimately it's about knowing who your child is. This is not just like, this for sure is not the list for every boy. And for some boys, this isn't going to work. And for some boys I could ask them, how you feeling? And they're like, oh man, I got so much to tell you. Some boys will do that. And some girls really need this better. And so, but really, you need to know, there's a lot of conversations you have to have with your kids. A lot of guidance you get to share, you get to have with. A lot of conversations you get to have with them, a lot of guidance you have to share with them. And so you've got to know under what circumstances am I most likely to have a successful conversation with my son or daughter. Oh, okay, they like being in the car. They like when it's just one-on-one. They like when I'm throwing a ball. They like when we go to this special tea place, whatever it is. They like when we're in the hot tub together. For me and my son, it was like we would do this thing. This was a good move on our parenting part, and that was that we had like family chore day. So Sundays, I would be with one son upstairs in the bathroom, teaching him how to clean the toilet. My back would be to him, and I would be in the bathtub, cleaning the bathtub up, and he'd be cleaning the toilet up. And then it would be a time, like I would save stuff to talk about for that. So whatever it is, know that this is your preference, your child's preference, and you got to know what your preference is too, especially if you're going to start talking about topics that make you feel uneasy. Under what circumstances are you most comfortable having the conversation? And then under what circumstances are they most comfortable? And then try to, whatever that thing is, build it into your life. So once a month pizza night. We go hit golf balls at the driving range. Whatever it is, that's the thing that, like, build it in, because then when you got stuff to talk about, you got your way to do it.
So media is a big thing.
Yeah.
Kids, YouTube.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on types of media or how to incorporate media into that sharing?
It's an interesting question. I have just come across this woman who's a 5th grade teacher who's using media really well in her classroom to teach life lessons. And so she's been sharing some things with me. So she just sent me this great video. Reagan, R-A-G-A-N is his last name. I can't remember his first name. Trevor Reagan. And he does this great video about growth mindset that she shares with her kids, and that this becomes kind of the language of the classroom. And then there's this other one that I can't remember what it was. But I think that's totally viable. Like sharing the same media and having a conversation about it. But have the conversation about it, but use the media as a jumping off point. But I think, yeah, looking at it, there's something to teach about everything. There's way more than I could even tell you. But yeah, poke around. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, you had a question or a thought?
How would you get your teen son to communicate and open up about feelings and things that sometimes he says, I can't talk to you, I don't feel comfortable talking to you about, when there's no longer that father figure since he passed away. He doesn't feel comfortable talking to mom about certain things. How would I get things out of him to communicate?
Yeah.
Not
Right. So if you've got, and the truth is, even if his dad was still around, he might not be expressing himself to his dad either. But the question, you feel a lot of responsibility that you're the one go-to. So if you're a single mom and this boy's dad died and he's not expressing himself, how do you get him to express himself? Because you're concerned about him. I think about that. You don't have to be the one. He needs somebody. It doesn't have to be you. In fact, it's so much that it could be you. For you to be, the mom, and think about the reasons why he might not speak to you. So he doesn't want to worry you. He doesn't want you to ask too many questions. He doesn't want you to have a big emotional reaction. Like, that's one of the beautiful things about taking a kid to a counselor, is it's neutral. He doesn't have to worry about worrying me. But then, so think more broadly about who else is in your son's life. So is it an uncle or a coach or a teacher or somebody at church or, a friend's father or something like that. So think about those think that it doesn't always have to be you, but they need somebody. We hope that they have somebody to talk to. It doesn't always have to be parent. It could be Jennifer.
So there's one thing missing here. I don't know if it's missing on purpose or if it is because it's across the board, boys and girls, but I see a problem with talking at them rather than talking to them.
Yeah.
It has like the preaching and when you write your
Totally.
essays,
Yeah.
do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
It's really a problem.
Yeah.
Specifically for boys, I feel.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's something you can.
No, I think that was more, I think that's sort of a general talking to kids idea, so that's probably why it's not on there. But for sure, yeah, you know, and asking questions and eliciting more than telling and preaching and lecturing. Yeah.
Would being here in a school district taking any of this away, like in terms of how they teach with and interact with boys in the classroom, but teachers going through this?
Oh, not now. I'm trying to think if I've spent time with schools in the school district, and I'm not sure that I have. So I come to some schools, I come to some school districts, and I spend time with them. But yeah, not here. But invite your teachers to come see the May 11th event.